Thanks everyone for listening to DoD Contract Academy podcast. Today, I have a veteran of the podcast and a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and someone that you have heard before if you've been listening to our episode. So, retired Colonel Louis Orndorff, how are you today, sir?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. So we've been chatting here for about a half hour before getting into this. And so for everyone that doesn't know, so we served together, right? Saudi Arabia, we were in a band together, right? You played bass in our band.
Yeah, you were teaching me how to play bass. Let's put it that way.
Well, you picked it up. You picked it up really quickly. So we had the best band in Riyadh. I can tell you that. So
for sure. For sure.
But and so now we work together more. Now we're both retired and kind of consulting and doing our different businesses. But as it relates to public sector sales, and you have a very interesting history. So I just wanted to, I wanted to let everyone get to know you before we get too into the weeds on like contracts, federal contracting, the opportunity for both small and large businesses out there. Who's Louis Orndorff? Where'd you go? I'm interested. Like, where'd you grow up? Why'd you join the Air Force?
Oh wow, that is a question.
I'm going back. You weren't expecting that. That's why I didn't.
No, I wasn't expecting that.
I didn't want to prep you.
I grew up in a little tiny town in Idaho, and actually graduated from a very small town called Bliss, Idaho. I went to the University of Idaho when I graduated from there, and I was studying physics and mathematics. So with my Air Force career starting by joining the Guard, the Idaho Air National Guard. I actually started out as a called the Cold War era reconnaissance troop. We would do F-4s that would fly in low over the enemy territories, running cameras and film, and I would help develop the strike packages as a very brand new young airman. And then I ended up working on enjoying that so much that I decided when I graduated from college I wanted to go active duty, and threw my name in the hat to go and get selected for the officer training program. And the recruiter came back and said, well, with all this technical background you've got, you're electronic warfare, all this physics and math, we'd like you to be a contracting officer. It's like, that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
It's amazing how they it's amazing how they actually come up with what you're going to do. I don't think it really has anything to do with what your background is.
Well, it was needs of the Air Force at the time.
Yep.
And so immediately my first thought was, oh, no way. No, I'm not interested. That's nothing but paperwork. I hate paperwork.
Right.
So I called a buddy of mine in the Guard, and he said, no, wait a minute. Somebody is buying all that high-tech stuff that the Air Force is playing with out there. So it may be worth going off and doing that. And then my thought was, okay, I'm going to go be a contracting officer and jump into another career field the first chance I get. So 30 years later, I retired as a contracting officer.
That is funny. But what's funny
I actually ended up enjoying it quite a bit.
No, I know you were always really passionate about it. What I was going to say is funny is I remember when I came in, needs of the Air Force, they needed navigators, right? And I think they got rid of all the navigators when GPS came out during, Desert Storm. They were using it, and then they realized, well, GPS doesn't work quite as good as we think it does, especially when ammo is involved or dropping troops somewhere. So, but as I came in, I'm like, well, I don't think there's a lot of. I wanted to fly, so I didn't care. But I'm like, I don't think there's a lot of jobs for navigators outside of the Air Force. I'm like, what? And I was just asking like recruiters and the flight training officers, I'm like, what jobs like translate besides pilot? Like what translates into a job, like a civilian job? Because you always hear about veterans that can't get jobs after they get out. Yeah. They're like, if you want a high paying job where people are coming after you and you have a skill set that companies can use, you want to be in acquisitions. You want to be a contracting officer, a program manager, or an engineer. And I kind of thought the same thing you did. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like a lot of paperwork. But then eventually I got transitioned into that. And I really enjoyed it too. But I think it's interesting that just from that perspective.
I'll tell you what worked well for me. I do hate paperwork. And so I found that I took an approach of I do not like to repeat paperwork over and over again. So I decided I'm just going to really understand it. I'm going to understand what the requirement is. I want to do it one time and get out of here. So my bosses and program managers, as I was a young, guy coming up through they loved it. They loved it because I just got serious about it. I would blast through all these acquisition timelines. I was always on time because I didn't have to keep redoing the paperwork. So me hating paperwork and being lazy about it ultimately made me very good at it.
It paid off.
It paid off. Yeah, it did.
It's interesting because there's so many different pieces to the government acquisitions process. This is part of what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
A lot of people, but what people go to is the contracting officer. So if they know one position, it's the CEO, right? And whether it is, hey, I'm a small business doing business development, trying to find an opportunity, they see the contracting officer's name on something, or they want to learn more about a program. Like contracting officer, I mean, if you know where to find the published contracts and whatnot, you can usually find out who is involved. But like you mentioned, there's also program managers, there's engineers, there's finance people. There's a lot of different players involved in the contracting process. I have my own thoughts on this, but just from your experience, when is it a good time for a company to reach out to the contracting officer? When is it appropriate for them to try to talk to the program manager, or another position?
Well, like with everything, it depends. There's 1,000 factors to take into account, but generically speaking, early on in an acquisition, when the program manager is doing fact finding, and they just need to understand what's out there, what's the art of possible, what are the what companies are doing, what's the capabilities available.
So market research.
Yeah, market research. It's appropriate at that time to talk directly to the program manager, and you can try to influence, but that's fine. But then there's a point where it becomes actually a funded acquisition or an acquisition that's going to go through the formal process. Once it becomes formal, then all of that interaction should be with the contracting team, the contract manager, negotiator, contracting administrative side, because everything has to be like collectively pulled together, and that will drive all the programmatic or the acquisition document, if you will. So at that point, it's very appropriate to work with the contracting officer. Okay. Once the contract is awarded, then it's very appropriate on a day-to-day basis to execute with the program manager. Now, the second you're talking about making any changes or doing something that will drive cost, scope, or performance or anything like that, you get the contracting officer back in the mix. And the program managers should know that. And most of the time, they are coming to the contracting officer way past the point where they've already worked the deal.
You're kidding me. It's not a perfectly oiled machine.
Well, you would hope, but no. In fact, I remember you doing that to me at least one time.
I probably did multiple times. I was just reading a little history of acquisitions, just going back to the Revolutionary War, which is, I thought, really interesting.
Oh, nice.
But one of the I underlined this: exasperating slowness is the hallmark of the military weapons acquisitions process, and then it goes on to explain why. But there is, I mean, there's so many people involved with government acquisitions that, like you said, like you might have a PM that's going in late. Of course, you also might have companies reaching out to the wrong people and not really understanding where to go. Have you ever heard of the Contracting Officer podcast?
I don't know if I have.
If you're not in a podcast, you probably have. But there's a podcast called the Contracting Officer Podcast. It's actually really good. It's two former, I think, military contracting officers that are no longer active duty. But what they described, like the relationship between the contracting officer and the program manager as a wedding in the business, right? And they basically said, hey, the contracting officer is the priest at a wedding. Like, think of them as the priest. They have like the legal authority to marry the bride, which is the program manager and the government, to the groom, which is the business, right? The small business owner wants to get married. So the bride is, kind of going on dates with all of these grooms here, maybe during the market research phase. But in the end, someone with the legal authority has to be able to put them together, right? And that was their kind of simple explanation of, hey, so that's the contracting officer, and then you got to spend the rest of your life with the bride until you get a divorce. But
yeah, I haven't heard that one, but I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, but I've probably mentioned it on here before too. So you grew up in the acquisitions world, and how long did you spend in the military?
I was over 30 years all together. So I was 6 years in the Guard doing F4 stuff, and then probably 25 plus years active duty in the acquisition community. Now, I went in and out of acquisition. I did some command and control stuff, like I said, and some political affairs as well. But I was a brand new lieutenant as a contracting officer at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. Jumping into major weapon system acquisitions.
Yeah.
And got and I was involved in that. In a couple of places, I was the contracting officer, the financial management, the price analyst, and the program manager all at the same time. I was working in environments where everything was very limited, so I had to do all of it. So I've been a program manager, I've been the finance guy, I've been the budget analyst, I've been the price analyst, I've been the all the different pieces that you see in the acquisition machine.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So that's probably just with that and your desire not to have to do paperwork over and over again. Yeah. So that led, and for people that aren't familiar with the military, your reward in the military for doing a good job is being given more work, more responsibility, more work, more responsibility, and eventually, kind of the culmination of that, is being given a command, right? So you were a commander many times over.
I was a commander 5 times.
That's crazy.
It was crazy.
So, and what does that mean for anyone listening?
Okay, so to be a commander means that you are the one responsible for the execution of that particular mission. So ultimately, that's what it boils down to: responsibility. And then you have people that work for you. And in the military environment, when you're a commander and you have military members appointed underneath you, you have really an amazing level of responsibility for their success and failures, and you can really have a lot of responsibility for their success in life as well. There's quite a level of detail on the personnel management side of command, but the mission management side of command, I don't think people really understand that. Everything that a team does, the commanders are really ultimately watching, or at the end of the day, totally responsible for the success or failure. And a lot of times in the military, when you see something has gone horribly wrong, you don't really see what happened to the soldiers, sailor, airmen, and Marines. You see what happens to the commanders.
Right.
This commander was removed because this thing happened underneath their command. So that responsibility is, you're responsible for a lot of things you have no control over. So you have to create environments. And in acquisition, you have to create this environment of an approach, like an attitude almost, about how people are going to behave and follow the rules, and how they're going to perform within that, how they're going to take their responsibilities to their program managers, their customers seriously, and not be the typical government employee that everybody's got a good stereotype on.
Right.
I think that probably answers your question.
No, that's perfect. So I mean, in driving your team to get what needs to get done quickly, and have a positive attitude. I mean, you're right. Everything kind of trickles downstream. But I want to give people that perspective of you, because well, I guess I technically met you first at Hanscom Air Force Base, so you were back there, and you were already a colonel. Then we were I was in Saudi managing FMS out there, but you actually had a much bigger portfolio than just one country. I don't know if you care to talk about that at all, but so now we're talking foreign military sales, right? So our government selling to other countries or other governments.
Yeah, so anytime the U.S. government is managing a defense contract for supplies, equipment, in some case services, over certain thresholds, Defense Contract Management Agency, their job is to help administer those giant contracts anywhere in the world. because it really takes a pretty big effort to administer these really big contracts. So my job there was I was commander for all defense contracts were being executed in the Middle East, in Africa, and some other countries in those areas. So we had a pretty broad, area of responsibility. Not that there was tons of contracts across Africa, but we did have some. The big ones were right there in the Middle East. So we
Sure.
would oversee the execution of some of these contracts in that location. The actual contracts were written by contracting activities back in the United States, and then they would assign the oversight, quality assurance, various other things on the production line to the DCMA men and women out there in the Middle East. So it was interesting. It was really fascinating to see how different countries and different companies would operate in different countries, and how they were able to, set the stage for them for their operations.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely interesting work. And so, I mean, you've seen basically it all, right? I mean, you've seen a lot of the
I don't
different.
know if I've seen it all.
Well, there's a lot to see, but you
Yeah.
spent a long time in procurement in the States with the military, from advanced weaponry to maybe more mundane things, and then foreign military sales, and you mentioned some diplomatic work. But now we're both retired, right? So obviously you have an expertise. You probably have a few expertises, right? So, but some of the things just for anyone listening that, we'll talk to, and I think my listeners know, I help a lot of businesses sell to the government. And typically I'm focused on business development and strategy, getting started, getting to that point where you're consistently winning contracts. But the real work starts once you're on contract, right? That's a saying I've heard over and over again, and it's true, right? That's when you're actually executing and delivering or producing whatever it is that the government is asked you for, and that's when I bring Colonel Orndorff in to troubleshoot for us and to help businesses with whether it is with the proposal process, if they needed something reviewed, or just, hey, there's a problem set with the contract. How can we fix this? Termination for convenience is one that we worked on. Maybe we could start there. What's termination for convenience, and what should a company be thinking if it happens to them?
Well, termination for convenience is when the government decides, for whatever reason, we no longer need this supply service, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of rules that go along with that. There's a lot of things that a company can actually come out financially ahead than where they were. It doesn't mean that you drop everything and you lose everything you've sunk into the effort. There's a lot of things that you can do there, but the key is, I'll kind of go back to what you said. You help people get to that point where there's contract award, and I know you do that well. But inevitably, there's going to be something that goes wrong. And this is where I like to think we've had some really good opportunities to help companies. Inevitably, there's things that go wrong, and it can be for any number of reasons that are your fault or not your fault. And that's where you quickly find yourself outside of any skill set that any reasonable person should even have.
Right.
Yeah, so you want to find some allies in the journey on that one, and I think that's just like that. Termination for convenience is one of those. Equitable adjustments. Your entire supply chain just went up massively in price. So how do you pass those costs and prices on to the government without you agree to a certain price? Pandemic hits, now you're going to have to charge more for 1,000 reasons.
Yep.
How do you work through all those details? Again, there's every section of the federal acquisition regulation covers various aspects of things that can go wrong. There are guidelines that try to keep things from going wrong, but when they do, that's where most people have no idea whether or not that's their cybersecurity system. I didn't know I needed that. What do I do now? I didn't sign up for that. I didn't realize I signed up for that. I didn't account for the actual cost that would impact my company. All kinds of things like that. So
yeah, no, you're right. It can be. I don't know how many times I've talked to a business where the RFP, to their credit, was kind of vague in some areas,
Yeah.
and you've pointed out too, and we're not gonna deep dive on the fire here, but there are times I've had conversations with you many times where we talked about the nuance of the way an RFP is written, right? So sometimes the way a contracting officer is going to write an RFP or an RFQ, it could just be a fire reference. It could be something else that they put in there, which, the layman, and myself included, right? I might read that from a PM hat on and not get exactly what the contracting officer was getting at there. Or, if I go back to being in, I might have, asked the contracting officer, hey, this is kind of the intent, or this is what we're getting after, or we have a requirement. But the CEO knows they have to put some language in there, legal language, to really get what the government needs, and that's where again, like you reviewing some of those things, it's a helpful advantage for a business to get that advice and get that perspective as they're writing their proposal and trying to land that contract initially.
Yeah, and this is again, you can read what a reasonable person would read and answer in a reasonable way, but you miss all sorts of decades of those nuances that come from both the program side and the contract side and some other areas within the public sector acquisitions. So it's nice to have somebody look at it before you get into trouble. That's my favorite thing is
Yeah.
try to get way ahead of stepping into some of those landmines. But once you do step on one of those landmines, calling up Richard Howard and Associates and saying, "Hey, help us out." That's where you really need somebody who's been there and navigated a few of those problems. And I'll say this one thing about being the commander for DCMA. I was a commander for DCMA 3 different times. One in plant for a major manufacturer in the United States, and one in the war zone over in Afghanistan. I was the commander for DCMA Southern Afghanistan, and then the one we talked about in the Middle East. What you do from an administrative perspective is really all you do is solve the problems that when the contracting team and the company put together the contract, they didn't foresee everything.
Right.
So ultimately, the government has to solve problems with the contractor. So I spent a lot of time as that commander making sure that we were putting really good solutions on the table and finding ways to go forward and keep minimize impact to the mission at the end of the day. So I've seen a lot of how things don't work, and hopefully found a lot of ways to help them get back on track.
I'll tell you, the person I call when I don't know the answer is you. So it's just a couple of weeks ago at a conference, I'm like, hey, we're trying to do this. So I think our listeners know that I do some selling for one of our clients too. So, great advice. And thanks for coming on the podcast today. So this has been an awesome conversation. If anybody is on contract and has questions, if anybody wants a contracting officer, a former contracting officer, to review a proposal they're putting together, absolutely, you can reach out to me through DoD Contract Academy or Richard at richardchoward.com, and I'll put you with Colonel Wandorf. We'll talk about what your situation is and see what the project looks like. But again, Colonel, thanks for coming on here. Do you have any parting thoughts for the masses before we end the podcast today?
I would say it's really fascinating to work in the government space, in the public sector space. But with it comes something you mentioned earlier, that those timelines. As you go through and you are doing your business planning and your strategies, one thing, just build in extra time for everything, every extra time for getting your payments made, extra time for completing milestones. Just build in that factor to begin with. Not every government team is going to be super proactive and try to reduce those timelines. I know a lot of government teams, they're like, hey, this is the timeline, and this is how much time we have, and this is how much time it's going to take, and I'm not in any hurry. And so one of the things from a business perspective is if you just acknowledge that and say, okay, this is most likely case scenario, let's build that, and then best case scenarios we can reduce that. if you want to understand where some of that is, obviously reach out. We can help you with that. But that time frame is the problem that has been struggled with for the. I mean, you can.
It goes back to the Revolutionary War. I'm looking at it right here.
Go way past the Revolutionary War. You can go back a lot further than that. I think you can go back to the beginning of the first concept of a contract and why is this taking so long? And in some cases, there's a good reason, but in a lot of cases, you manage what you can manage. But we can help you figure some of that out. Yeah, and that's just a final thought. I mean, contracting is complicated. Acquisition is lucrative, and there's some really good things to do out there. But the train doesn't necessarily roll on your time frame. So you gotta, if you can wrap your brain around that, then it's actually a pretty interesting environment to operate in. That's all I've got.
Well, I'm sure that's not all you've got, but that's all the time we've got for today. All right. Well, hey, thanks again for coming on. For everyone listening, thank you. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and head over to dodcontract.com, see some of the programs we have available. I can hook you up with Lou if we have something for you, and then we'll see you next time.